The autumn sun hung low over Rockford, a sleepy town nestled in the rolling hills where everyone knew everyone and secrets were. Currency traded in hushed whispers at the local diner. Its golden rays cast long, jagged shadows across the cracked asphalt of Rockford High's courtyard. The air crisp with the scent of fallen leaves and the distant hum of a lawnmower, a reminder of the town's quiet, predictable rhythm. Students spilled out of the red brick building, their laughter and shouts echoing as they headed for buses or lingered in clusters, trading gossip and weekend plans. Among them, moving with a quiet grace that went unnoticed by most, was Natalie Marks, the new history teacher. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. At 28, she was an enigma to the town, a stranger with no history, no roots, and a reserved demeanor that made her an easy target for scrutiny. Her dark hair was pulled into a tight bun, her modest cardigan and knee-length skirt blending into the background of the bustling hallway. She clutched a stack of graded essays, her hazel eyes scanning the floor, avoiding the curious glances of students who whispered about the new lady who seemed too quiet, too plain, too easy to overlook. Natalie wasn't here to draw attention. She'd chosen Rockford to escape, to bury a past that still haunted her dreams, to start anew as a teacher molding young minds with history and kindness. But the past, she would soon learn, had a way of clawing its way back no matter how far you ran. In the back row of her third-period history class sat Trent Carter, a senior with broad shoulders and a smirk that could silence a room. His dark hair fell carelessly over his forehead, and his eyes glinted with a mix of arrogance and menace. He was the unspoken king of Rockford High, the leader of a trio that ruled the school's social hierarchy with an iron grip. Vince, lanky and loud with a laugh like a hyena's, was his right-hand man, always eager to please. Riley, sharp-tongued and sharper-eyed, completed the group, her beauty a weapon she wielded with precision. Together, they were untouchable, their cruelty a rite of passage for anyone who dared stand out. Trent leaned back in his chair, tossing a crumpled paper ball at Vince, who caught it and lobbed it toward a quiet freshman named Liam in the front row. The paper hit Liam's neck, and he flinched, his face reddening as he hunched lower in his seat. The trio snickered, their laughter a low, cruel hum. Natalie, standing at the chalkboard, paused mid-sentence, her chalk hovering over a half-written quote about the Revolutionary War. "Trent, Vince, Riley," she said, her voice soft but steady, cutting through the noise. "That's enough." The room fell silent, the air thick with tension. Trent's smirk widened, his eyes locking onto hers. "What are you going to do about it, Miss Marks?" he drawled, his tone dripping with mockery. Natalie's jaw tightened, but she turned back to the board, her hand steady as she resumed writing. She wasn't here to fight. Not yet. The whispers started immediately after class. Students clustered in hallways, phones buzzing with messages about the new teacher who dared to call out Trent Carter. Some admired her courage. Others pitied her naivety. But Natalie walked through it all with her head down, her expression serene, her thoughts a carefully guarded fortress. That evening, in her small, sparsely furnished apartment, Natalie stood before a cracked bathroom mirror, her fingers brushing through her hair as she let it fall loose around her shoulders. Her reflection stared back a stranger to the woman she'd once been, yet haunted by shadows of who she used to be. She closed her eyes, breathing deeply, willing the memories to stay buried. But already she could feel them stirring, like embers waiting for the wind to fan them into flame. By the second day, word had spread through Rockford High like wildfire. The new history teacher was an easy target. Natalie's quietness, her tendency to avoid confrontation, had been noted and cataloged by the school's social predators. And at the top of that food chain sat Trent, Riley, and Vince, their appetites whetted by yesterday's brief encounter. The morning started innocuously enough. Natalie entered her classroom with the same quiet dignity, arranging her materials. with practiced precision. But she could feel the shift in the air, the electric anticipation that crackled through the room like static before a storm. "Good morning, class," she began, her voice carrying the same gentle authority as before. "Today we'll be discussing the Boston Tea Party and the events that led to boring." Riley interrupted, her voice cutting through Natalie's words like a blade. The cheerleader sat with perfect posture, her blonde hair cascading over one shoulder. Her lips curved in a smile that never reached her eyes. "Don't you have anything more exciting to teach us, Miss Marks?" A ripple of nervous laughter swept through the classroom. Natalie paused, her chalk hovering over the board, but her voice remained steady. "History shapes our present, Riley. Understanding our past helps us navigate our future." "Deep," Vince chimed in from the back, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Real philosophical teach. You get that from a fortune cookie?" More laughter, louder now, emboldened by the trio's brazenness. Natalie turned to face the class, her hazel eyes scanning the room with calm assessment. For a moment, just a flickering. Instant something dangerous sparked in her gaze. But then it was gone, replaced by the same patient composure. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "we could learn something from the colonists' patience before they took action." Trent leaned forward, his chair creaking under his weight. "You threatening us, Miss Marks?" His voice was low, menacing, carrying the weight of his reputation through the suddenly silent classroom. Natalie met his gaze without flinching. "I'm teaching history, Trent, nothing more." But inside, she felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the old instincts awakening like muscles stretching after a long sleep. Her hands, steady on the surface, trembled slightly as she turned back to the board. The past she'd tried so hard to bury was stirring, responding to the challenge. In these young predators' eyes, the harassment continued throughout the week, subtle at first, but growing bolder with each passing day. Riley would make snide comments about Natalie's simple clothing, her voice pitched just loud enough for others to hear. Vince would accidentally knock over his books whenever Natalie was speaking, the crash echoing through the room like punctuation to her words. And Trent simply watched, his presence a constant threat, his silence more menacing than any words. Other students began to take notice. Some looked away uncomfortably, unwilling to get involved. Others watched with the morbid fascination of spectators at a car crash, pulling out their phones to capture moments of humiliation for social media. And a few, like quiet Sophia Lee in the corner, watched with growing concern, recognizing something familiar in Natalie's forced composure. But Natalie endured it all with the same serene mask, her voice never wavering as she taught about revolutions and rebellions, about ordinary people pushed beyond their breaking points, if there was irony. In the lessons, she didn't acknowledge it. If the parallels were too close for comfort, she buried them deep. Telling and preparing this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. By the third week, the bullying had evolved into a carefully orchestrated campaign. Trent and his crew had turned torment into an art form, their attacks precisely calculated to humiliate without crossing lines that might bring administrative intervention. It started with small things, Natalie's classroom supplies going missing, rearranged in subtle ways that disrupted her lessons. Her coffee mug, a simple ceramic piece she'd brought from home, appeared one morning filled with chalk dust. Her grade book was accidentally knocked to the floor, papers scattering like autumn leaves. The psychological warfare escalated during lunch periods. Natalie typically ate alone in her classroom, grading papers and preparing for afternoon lessons. But now she found herself subjected to a parade of visitants who claimed to need help, but spent their time making observations about her sparse lunch, her solitary habits, her apparent friendlessness. "Don't you have any friends, Miss Marks?" Riley asked one afternoon, perching on a desk with feline grace. "I mean, it's kind of sad, eating alone every day. Natalie looked up from her sandwich, simple peanut butter and jelly, nothing fancy, and met Riley's calculating gaze. "I enjoy the quiet," she replied evenly. "It helps me focus on my students' needs." "Right," Vince added from the doorway, where he lounged with studied casualness. "Because we're all just dying to learn about dead people and old wars." The comment drew snickers from the handful of students who'd gathered, drawn by the scent of potential drama. Natalie felt the familiar heat rising in her chest, the old anger stirring like a sleeping dragon. But she forced herself to take a slow breath, to remember why she was here. "History isn't about dead people, Vince," she said quietly. "It's about understanding the consequences of our choices." The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. For a moment, something flickered in Vince's eyes: uncertainty, perhaps even shame. But then Trent appeared in the doorway, his presence shifting the dynamic instantly. "Having a party without me?" he asked, his voice carrying its usual edge of mockery. "That's not very nice, Teach." The atmosphere in the room grew thick, oppressive. Other students sensed the change and began to drift away, unwilling to be caught in whatever was coming. But Natalie remained seated, her hands folded calmly on her desk, even as every instinct screamed at her to run. "We were just having a discussion about history," she replied, her voice steady despite the racing of her heart. "Yeah?" Trent moved closer, his footsteps heavy on the linoleum floor. "What kind of history?" "The kind that teaches us about power," Natalie said, meeting his gaze directly. "About what happens when people abuse it." The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Trent's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. Behind him, Riley and Vince watched with predatory interest, sensing that their leader was being challenged in a way he wasn't accustomed to. "Careful, Miss Marks," Trent said finally, his voice barely above a whisper. "Sometimes people who talk about power don't really understand what it means." Then he was gone, his followers trailing behind him like wolves after their alpha. But the threat lingered in the empty classroom, a promise of escalation that made Natalie's skin crawl. That afternoon, she found her car in the parking lot with all 4 tires slashed, the word "weak" keyed into the paint of her driver's side door. She stood there for a long moment, staring at the damage, feeling something cold and hard settling in her stomach. The maintenance crew helped her arrange for a tow truck, their faces sympathetic but carefully neutral. Everyone knew who was responsible, but no one would say it aloud. That was how power worked in places like this, through fear, through the collective decision to look the other way. As Natalie waited for her ride home, she caught sight of herself in the school's front windows. For just a moment, she saw not the mild-mannered teacher she'd become, but the woman she used to be: dangerous, focused, unafraid. The reflection sent a chill through her, a reminder of everything she'd tried to leave behind. But that night, alone in her apartment, she made a decision that would change everything. Moving to her bedroom closet, she pushed aside the simple dresses and cardigans to reveal a small, locked box hidden in the back corner. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened it, revealing the only remnants of her former life: photographs, newspaper clippings, and a single black belt worn smooth with use. She held the belt in her hands, feeling its familiar weight, remembering the years of training, the discipline, the power. She'd sworn never to use it again, never to be that person. But as she thought about Trent's threatening words, about the escalating campaign of harassment, she wondered if some promises were meant to be broken. The past was calling, and for the first time in years, Natalie Marks was listening. The morning of the incident dawned gray and oppressive, with storm clouds gathering on the horizon like an omen. Natalie arrived at school earlier than usual, hoping to prepare her lessons in peace before the building filled with students. But peace, she was learning, was a luxury she could no longer afford. The hallways buzzed with an electric tension that seemed to follow her wherever she went. Whispered conversations stopped when she passed, replaced by calculating stares and barely suppressed snickers. Someone had spread the word about her vandalized car, and the story had grown in the telling, transformed from simple property damage into a symbol of her vulnerability. Her first 2 classes passed without major incident, though she noticed the increased boldness in her students' behavior. Paper airplanes sailed through the air during her Revolutionary War lecture. Phones appeared openly on desks, their screens glowing with social media feeds that definitely weren't about the Battle of Yorktown. The normal teenage testing of boundaries had escalated into something more brazen, more challenging. But it was during her 3rd period class, the one with Trent, Riley, and Vince, that everything finally came to a head. The trio entered together. As they always did, their presence immediately shifting the room's energy. But today was different. Today, there was something predatory in their movements, a sense of purpose that made Natalie's instincts scream warnings she'd spent years learning to ignore. "Good morning, class," she began, her voice carrying its usual calm authority. "Today, we're going to discuss the Boston Massacre and how a single moment of violence can change the course of violence." Riley interrupted, her voice honey-sweet and poisonous. "That's an interesting topic choice, Miss Marks. Almost like you're trying to tell us something." Nervous laughter rippled through the classroom. Several students had their phones out now, recording openly, sensing that something significant was about to happen. Natalie felt the familiar heat rising in her chest, but forced herself to remain composed. "History has many lessons about the consequences of our actions," she replied evenly. "Perhaps we could all benefit from—" "Cut the crap," Trent interrupted, rising from his seat with fluid grace. His voice carried across the room like a challenge, and every student turned to watch. "We all know what this is really about." The classroom fell silent, except for the soft whir of air conditioning and the distant sounds of school life, continuing in blissful ignorance of the drama unfolding in room 237. Natalie set down her chalk and turned to face him fully, her hands steady despite the racing of her heart. "I'm not sure what you mean, Trent," she said quietly. "Sure you do." He moved closer, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. "You think you can come into our school, our town, and talk down to us. Act all superior with your little history lessons and your quiet teacher act." Vince snickered from his seat, but there was something nervous in the sound now. Even he seemed to sense that this was escalating beyond their usual games. But Riley watched with bright, eager eyes, like a cat anticipating the death throes of a cornered mouse. "I'm here to teach," Natalie said, her voice carrying a note of steel that made several students look up from their phones in surprise. "Nothing more." "Bullshit," Trent spat, now close enough that she could smell his cologne, could see the pulse jumping in his throat. "You think you're better than us, but you're nothing. Just another nobody teacher in a nobody town, and it's time you learned your place." The words hung in the air like a gauntlet thrown down. Around the room, phones continued to record, capturing every second of the confrontation for posterity. Natalie could feel the weight of 24 pairs of eyes, the electric anticipation of an audience waiting for blood. And then Riley moved. She rose from her seat with feline grace, her heels clicking against the linoleum as she approached. There was something different about her now, something raw and hungry that had broken through her usual polished facade. "You know what I think?" she said, her voice carrying the particular cruelty that only teenage girls could perfect. "I think Miss Marks needs to understand how things work around here." The slap came without warning, a sharp crack that echoed through the classroom like a gunshot. Rayleigh's palm connected with Natalie's cheek with enough force to snap her head to the side, enough to leave an angry red mark that would be visible for hours. For a moment, everything stopped. The world held its breath. Even the recording phones seemed to pause, as if the universe itself was waiting to see what would happen next. Natalie slowly turned her head back, her hazel eyes finding Riley's triumphant gaze. The cheerleader stood there with her hand still raised, her lips curved in a satisfied smile, waiting for the tears, the apologies, the complete capitulation she expected. Instead, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Natalie's eyes had changed. Gone was the gentle, patient teacher who'd endured weeks of harassment with quiet dignity. In her place stood someone else entirely, someone whose gaze held depths of knowledge that had nothing to do with textbooks, whose stillness spoke of coiled power waiting to be unleashed. That, Natalie said quietly, her voice carrying a note of finality that made the hair on several students' arms stand on end, was a mistake. What happened next occurred so quickly that the recording phones could barely capture it. Natalie moved with a fluid grace that seemed to defy physics, her body flowing like water around Riley's shocked form. One moment Riley was standing triumphant, her hand still tingling from the slap. The next, she was on the floor, her arm twisted, behind her back in a hold that was both gentle and absolutely inescapable. Vince started to rise from his seat, some instinct to help his friend overriding his shock. But Natalie's free hand moved in a precise gesture that somehow conveyed both warning and promise. He froze mid-motion, his face pale, suddenly understanding that he was seeing something far beyond his comprehension. Trent, the great leader, the unquestioned king of Rockford High, stood paralyzed by a fear he'd never experienced before. In all his years of intimidating others, he'd never encountered someone who radiated this kind of controlled, lethal competence. "Let me explain something to all of you," Natalie said, her voice calm and conversational despite the fact that she had Riley pinned to the floor with almost casual ease. "Respect isn't taken. It's earned. And bullying isn't power, it's the refuge of the weak." Riley struggled briefly, testing the hold, but stopped when she realized that every movement only made her position more uncomfortable. Tears of humiliation and genuine fear began to leak from her eyes. "Please," she whispered. "Please let me go." Natalie looked down at her for a long moment, something almost like pity flickering in her eyes. Then she released the hold and stepped back, once again becoming the mild-mannered teacher who'd walked into the classroom 20 minutes earlier. But the illusion was shattered now. Every student in that room had seen behind the mask, had glimpsed the dangerous competence that Natalie Marks kept hidden beneath her quiet exterior. They'd witnessed something that would be talked about for years to come, shared and reshared on social media until it became the stuff of legend. As Riley scrambled to her feet, tears streaming down her face, as Trent backed away with wide, frightened eyes, as Vince sat frozen in his seat like a deer in headlights, Natalie smoothed down her cardigan and picked up her chalk. "Now then," she said, her voice returning to its usual gentle tone. "Where were we? Ah yes, the Boston Massacre. Sometimes, you see, a single moment changes everything." Within an hour, the video had spread through Rockford High like wildfire. Shaky phone footage of Riley's slap and Natalie's swift, decisive response played on loop in every corner of the school. Students huddled around screens in hallways, bathrooms, and empty classrooms, their voices a constant buzz of amazement, fear, and speculation. "Holy shit, did you see how fast she moved?" Riley looked like she was going to piss herself. Where the hell did a history teacher learn to do that? Trent didn't even try to help. "What a pussy." The last comment, whispered in passing, cut through the football star's consciousness like a blade. He stood at his locker, his hands shaking as he fumbled with the combination, acutely aware of the stares and whispers that followed him down every hallway. For the first time in his high school career, Trent Carter was not the apex predator. He was prey. In the principal's office, Mr. Wilson sat across from Natalie, his weathered face creased with concern and confusion. The video played on his computer. Screened for the third time, the audio tinny through the small speakers, but the visuals crystal clear. Rayleigh's aggressive slap, Natalie's impossibly swift response, the absolute stillness that followed. "Miss Marks," he said finally, closing the laptop with a soft click. "I have to ask, where did you learn to do that?" Natalie sat with perfect posture, her hands folded in her lap, her expression calm but guarded. "I took some self-defense classes in college. I never expected to need them." It was technically true, though calling her years of intensive martial arts training some self-defense classes was like calling the Pacific Ocean a large puddle. But Mr. Wilson, a kind man in his late 50s who'd spent 30 years dealing with teenage drama, seemed willing to accept the explanation. "The Hayes girl isn't pressing charges," he said. "In fact, she's not talking to anyone right now. Neither are the Carter boy or young Matthews. They've all suddenly become very quiet." A ghost of a smile flickered across Natalie's lips. "Sometimes silence is the beginning of wisdom, indeed." Mr. Wilson leaned back in his chair, studying her with new eyes. "I have to tell you, Miss Marks, in all my years as an educator, I've never seen anything quite like what happened in your classroom today." "I hope it won't happen again," Natalie replied. "Violence should always be a last resort. But sometimes it is necessary," he said quietly. "Those three have been terrorizing students and staff for years. Oh, we've tried to address it. Detention, suspension, parent conferences. But their parents have money, influence. The Carter boy's father practically owns half this town. He paused, looking out his window at the courtyard where students still clustered in excited groups, their phones glowing as they shared and reshared the morning's drama. "You know what I think?" he continued. "I think you might have done something that needed doing. Those kids needed to learn that actions have consequences, that there are people in this world they can't intimidate." Natalie said nothing, but something in her posture relaxed slightly. "That said," Mr. Wilson added, his tone becoming more official, "I have to ask you to be more careful going forward. What you did today, however justified, opened doors that might be hard to close again." As if summoned by his words, Sophia Lee appeared in the outer office, her dark eyes wide with concern. The quiet art student had been in the classroom when everything happened, had seen the whole confrontation unfold. Now she clutched a folder to her chest like armor, her usual shyness warring with something stronger. "Excuse me," she said when Mr. Wilson waved her in. "I wanted to make sure Miss Marks was okay." "I'm fine, Sophia," Natalie said, genuine warmth entering her voice for the first time that day. "Thank you for asking. What they did to you wasn't right," Sophia continued, her voice gaining strength. "Everyone's been too scared to say anything, but we all saw how they treated you. How they treat everyone who can't fight back." She looked directly at Mr. Wilson, her young face set with determination. "Maybe now things will change." After Sophia left, Mr. Wilson turned back to Natalie. "You've made quite an impression on our students. Half of them are terrified of you. The other half think you're some kind of superhero. I'm not sure which reaction concerns me more." Meanwhile, in an empty classroom across the building, Trent, Riley, and Vince sat in shell-shocked silence. The video played on Riley's phone for the dozenth time, each viewing making the reality of their situation more undeniable. "How the fuck did she do that?" Vince whispered, his voice hoarse. "I mean, she moved like she was in a movie or something." Riley's cheek still burned from the slap she'd delivered, but it was nothing compared to the humiliation that ate at her insides. In 30 seconds, she'd gone from queen bee to laughingstock. Her social media was already flooded with memes and comments, her carefully constructed image crumbling with each passing hour. "We have to do something," she said, but her voice lacked its usual venom. "We can't just let her get away with this. Are you insane?" Trent exploded, though he kept his voice low. "Did you see what she did to you? With one fucking hand? So what, we just roll over? Let everyone think we're weak? Everyone already thinks we're weak." Vince shot back. "Did you see how people looked at us in the hallway? They're not scared anymore. They're laughing. The truth of it hung between them like a death sentence. For years, their power had been built on fear, on the collective understanding that crossing them meant pain. But Natalie had shattered that illusion in 30 seconds, revealing them for what they truly were: children playing at being monsters, dangerous only to those who couldn't fight back. As the final bell rang and students began streaming toward the exits, the halls of Rockford High buzzed with a new energy. Teachers whispered in corners, their voices carrying notes of relief and vindication. Students walked taller, their eyes bright with the possibility that things might finally change. And in her empty classroom, Natalie Marks sat alone, staring at the chalkboard where the morning's lesson remained half-finished. The Boston Massacre, she'd been saying. Sometimes, a single moment changes everything. She touched her cheek where Riley's slap had landed, feeling the faint sting that remained. Then she picked up her chalk and finished writing the lesson on the board, her handwriting as calm and precise as ever. But inside, she could feel the old fire burning again, the discipline, the focus, the absolute certainty of someone who knew exactly what she was capable of. She'd tried to bury that part of herself, to become someone gentle and safe. But perhaps, she thought as she gathered her papers, some things were too powerful to stay buried forever. The past had finally caught up with Natalie Marks, and maybe, just maybe, that wasn't such a bad thing after all. 3 days after the classroom incident, Mr. Wilson's voice crackled through the morning announcements with news that sent ripples of excitement through Rockford High. Our annual talent show is approaching with the theme Hidden Talents. Sign-ups begin today for students and faculty who wish to showcase abilities beyond the classroom. The auditorium buzzed with speculation. Students whispered about what other secrets their quiet history teacher might be hiding. In the back row, Trent slumped in his seat, his former swagger replaced by careful silence. Rayleigh sat rigidly, avoiding eye contact with anyone, while Vince stared at his hands, the weight of his choices finally settling on his shoulders. Sophia Lee approached Natalie's classroom after school, clutching a sign-up sheet with trembling fingers. "Miss Marks, are you going to perform?" Natalie looked up from her grading, studying the earnest face of the girl who'd witnessed everything. "I hadn't considered it." "Why?" "Because people need to see that strength isn't just about being loud and mean," Sophia said, her voice gaining confidence. "They need to see what real strength looks like." That evening, alone in her apartment, Natalie opened the locked box containing her past. Among the photographs and newspaper clippings was a DVD labeled Exhibition Match, Snow Polo, 2018. Her hands shook as she inserted it into her laptop, watching herself move with fluid grace in what had been her final performance before walking away from competitive fighting. The routine was beautiful, more dance than combat. Every movement telling a story of discipline conquering anger, wisdom overcoming violence. Maybe it was time to show Rockford that martial arts could heal rather than harm. The next morning, Natalie quietly added her name to the talent show list. Word spread like wildfire that Miss Marks had signed up. Students clustered around phones, rewatching the viral classroom video and speculating about what she might perform. Some were excited, others nervous about what their mysterious teacher might reveal next. Desperate to reclaim their shattered reputations, Trent, Riley, and Vince also registered for the show. Their planned routine would showcase Trent's athletic abilities, Riley's cheerleading skills, and Vince's surprising comedic talent, a last-ditch effort to remind everyone why they'd once been untouchable. But their rehearsals were tense and fractured. "This is pointless," Vince muttered during practice. "Everyone's just going to remember what she did to Riley." "Shut up," Riley snapped, though her usual venom was notably absent. The memory of being helplessly pinned to the classroom floor haunted her dreams. Meanwhile, Natalie prepared in solitude. She rented an empty warehouse on the town's outskirts, where, surrounded by mirrors and silence, she began rediscovering the art she'd abandoned. The movements returned slowly, muscle memory fighting against years of suppression. But gradually, the fluidity came back, along with the perfect balance between power and control that had once defined her. This routine would be different from her fighting days. No aggression, no displays of dominance. Instead, she crafted a story of transformation, the journey from violence to peace, from anger to understanding, from fear to true strength. Sophia often stayed after school to help with preparations, and one evening caught a glimpse of Natalie practicing through the gymnasium windows. "It's beautiful," she breathed, watching her teacher move with impossible grace. Natalie paused, noticing the girl's presence. "Would you like to watch?" For the next hour, Sophia sat mesmerized as Natalie worked through her routine, each movement a perfect fusion of power and artistry. When it ended, Sophia asked quietly, "How long have you been doing this?" "Since I was 7, Natalie replied, toweling off sweat. "My parents thought it would teach me discipline." "Did it?" Natalie was quiet for a long moment. "Eventually. But first, it taught me how dangerous I could be. That was the harder lesson, learning when not to use what I knew." The night of the talent show, Rockford High's auditorium overflowed with spectators. Word had spread beyond the school, drawing parents, community members, and curious residents from neighboring towns. Everyone sensed that tonight would be more than entertainment, it would be a reckoning. Early acts passed in a blur of nervous energy and polite applause. The jazz band performed competently, a sophomore delivered a stunning Taylor Swift cover, and the drama club earned genuine enthusiasm with their Romeo and Juliet scene. But everyone was waiting. Trent, Riley, and Vince performed midway through the program. Their routine was polished and professional, a fusion of athletics, dance, and comedy that showcased their individual talents while emphasizing their unity. Trent's backflips were flawless, Riley's choreography sharp and precise, Vince's comedic timing drawing genuine laughter. For a moment, it seemed they might reclaim their former glory. The applause was strong, appreciative. Students who'd been whispering about their downfall suddenly remembered why this trio had ruled the school. Then the lights dimmed for the final act. Natalie walked onto the stage wearing simple black clothing that allowed complete freedom of movement. No flashy costume or dramatic makeup, just a woman preparing to share something deeply personal with a room full of strangers. The music began softly, a haunting melody that seemed to rise from somewhere ancient and eternal. Then Natalie began to move. What followed was unlike anything the audience had ever witnessed. This wasn't the explosive power from the viral classroom video, this was art in its purest form. Movement that told a story of struggle and redemption, of violence transformed into beauty, of strength found not in dominance but in understanding. Every gesture was precise yet flowing, powerful yet gentle. She moved through sequences that would have appeared as deadly combat techniques to a trained eye, but to the captivated audience, looked like pure dance. The story unfolded through motion, a young person learning to fight, growing strong, becoming dangerous, making mistakes, finding wisdom, choosing peace. In the audience, Sophia watched with tears streaming down her face, finally understanding something fundamental about the teacher who'd changed her life. Mr. Wilson leaned forward, recognizing the same controlled power he'd seen in the classroom, but transformed into something transcendent. In the back row, Trent, Riley, and Vince sat in stunned silence, finally comprehending what they'd tried to challenge. This wasn't just someone who'd taken self-defense classes, this was a master who dedicated her life to conquering herself as much as her art. As the music reached its crescendo, Natalie's movements became impossibly complex and beautiful. She leaped and spun with defiant grace, her body seeming to mock the laws of physics. But the moments of perfect stillness were most powerful demonstrations that true strength lay not in movement but in choosing when to move. The performance ended with Natalie center stage, perfectly still, breathing controlled despite the routine's physical demands. The auditorium held its collective breath for an eternal moment. Then the applause erupted, lasting over 5 minutes. The standing ovation united students who'd never spoken, teachers who recognized something they'd lost in their own lives, and community members witnessing the perfect balance between strength and grace. In the lobby afterward, groups clustered around Sophia, eager for insights about Miss Marks. The once invisible art student suddenly found herself at attention center. "She's not what people think," Sophia said with newfound confidence. "She's not scary or violent. She's peaceful. But strong, really, really strong." Students nodded, their perceptions fundamentally altered. The viral video had shown them power. The talent show revealed wisdom. Many understood the difference for the first time. Trent stood alone near the exit, his usual entourage notably absent. Riley had fled immediately after the show, too overwhelmed to face questions. Vince had disappeared into the crowd, seeking anonymity that would have been unthinkable weeks before. "Hell of a performance," Mr. Wilson said, approaching Trent. "Yeah," Trent replied quietly. "I had no idea." "Most people don't," the principal observed. "Real strength rarely announces itself." The words hit harder than any lecture or detention ever could. Trent found himself questioning everything. Had his size, popularity, and father's influence ever been true strength? Or something else entirely? Over the following days, changes rippled through Rockford High. Former bullying targets walked taller, emboldened by what they'd witnessed. Students began signing up for martial arts classes, inspired by Natalie's demonstration that physical discipline could be art. The viral classroom video was discussed differently now on social media. Where once it had been shared as entertainment, now it sparked conversations about self-defense, standing up to bullies, and the difference between violence and strength. Most surprising was Vince's transformation. 3 days after the show, he appeared at Natalie's classroom door during lunch, his usual bravado replaced by shame. "Miss Marks, could I talk to you?" She gestured to a chair, her expression carefully neutral. "I wanted to apologize," he began, voice barely above a whisper, "for everything. The bullying, harassment, all of it. What brought about this change?" Natalie asked gently. Vince stared at his hands. "Watching you perform, seeing what real strength looks like. Realizing everything I thought was power was just fear." He looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I don't want to be that person anymore, the one who hurts people because he's afraid of being hurt." Natalie felt something tight in her chest loosen. This was why she'd become a teacher, not to impart facts and dates, but to help young people understand themselves. "Fear is natural, Vince," she said softly. "Courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing the right thing despite being afraid. How do I start? How do I become better?" Natalie smiled genuinely for the first time since arriving in Rockford. One choice at a time, one day at a time. And maybe by learning that real strength comes from discipline, not dominance. 6 weeks later, Rockford High had settled into its transformed reality. The changes weren't dramatic, no Hollywood-style reversals, but they were real, woven into daily school life in ways that mattered. Vince had begun martial arts lessons, driving to a neighboring town's dojo 3 times weekly. His progress was slow but steady, and more importantly, his approach to others had fundamentally shifted. He no longer participated in casual cruelties and had begun intervening when he saw younger students being picked on, not with threats, but with quiet authority that surprised everyone, including himself. Riley had withdrawn from the social spotlight, spending time with genuinely supportive friends rather than maintaining her hierarchical position. She'd started seeing the school counselor, working through insecurities that had driven her need to tear others down. Trent had changed, least outwardly, but those who knew him saw the difference. His natural leadership remained, tempered now by humility. He'd stopped using influence to intimidate and began using it to include organizing study groups for struggling students, mentoring younger athletes with patience rather than aggression. Natalie had found something she hadn't realized she'd been searching for: peace. Not the fragile peace of hiding and denial that had characterized her early Rockford years, but deep, unshakable peace from accepting all parts of herself. She was a teacher and a martial artist, gentle and strong, capable of violence, but choosing wisdom. The talent show video had gone viral with captions about "Teacher shows real strength" and "What martial arts is really about." She'd received messages from former students, fellow educators, and old training partners who'd recognized her despite the years. But the most meaningful message came from an unexpected source: a young woman in Snow Hollow who'd recognized the person who'd once hurt her in a fighting ring years before. "I wanted you to know I've been following your story," the message read. "What you're doing now, teaching, showing kids a better way, means everything. You helped me find my own path to healing. Thank you for becoming who you were meant to be." Natalie read it 3 times, tears blurring her vision. The guilt she'd carried didn't disappear completely, but transformed into something bearable, a reminder of growth rather than a crushing weight. On a crisp Friday afternoon, as autumn painted Rockford gold and crimson, Natalie stood in her classroom preparing for the weekend. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Sophia appeared holding a wrapped package, wearing the confident smile that had replaced her former shyness. "I made something for you." Natalie unwrapped it carefully, revealing a stunning charcoal drawing that captured her mid-performance from the talent show. But this wasn't just technical representation. Sophia had somehow captured the emotion, the perfect balance between power and peace that had defined that evening. "It's beautiful," Natalie breathed. "Thank you. I wanted to show what I saw that night," Sophia explained. "Not the scary teacher from the video, not even the amazing martial artist. Just you, all of you." As Sophia left, Natalie hung the drawing where she could see it daily, a reminder of her journey from hiding her true self to embracing it completely, from running from her past to integrating it into her present. Outside her window, students crossed the courtyard with more respectful, genuine interactions than months before. Some waved when they saw her, their smiles free of fear or mockery. Natalie Marks had come to Rockford to hide. Instead, she'd found herself. And in doing so, she'd helped an entire school community discover something better within themselves. The past would always be part of her story, but it no longer defined her future. That belonged to her students, the lessons she would teach, the lives she would touch with hard-won wisdom about true strength, not about never falling down, but about getting back up and helping others do the same. Up next, we have 2 more incredible stories that are waiting for you. Just click the image you want to watch, and it will take you there. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. It would mean a lot.